The billionaire stepped onto his luxury yacht at midnight, champagne in hand, the Mediterranean moon cast in silver across calm waters. Jimmy A. Gates had everything. A tech empire worth billions, a beautiful fiancée waiting below deck, the open sea ahead. He took 3 steps toward the master suite, then someone grabbed him from behind. A hand clamped over his mouth, his champagne glass shattered on the polished teak. "Don't look," a woman whispered, her voice trembling with terror. "Don't let them know you saw." Jimmy froze. The hand belonged to Isabel, his maid, the woman who brought his 4 a.m. espresso, the woman whose daughter's name he'd never asked. Her eyes were wide with fear as she pressed him against the wall, her finger to her lips. Through the reflection in a porthole beside them, Jimmy saw his fiancée, Victoria, pressed against his business partner, David, in a passionate embrace. Their bodies moved together in the shadows of the lower deck, completely unaware they were being watched.
But the terror in Isabel's grip told Jimmy this wasn't about infidelity. Behind them, 2 men in dark clothes carried a large metal trunk up the gangway. The men weren't part of his usual crew. Isabel's hand shook against his mouth as they passed. When they disappeared below, she finally released him. "Mr. Gates," she whispered, pulling him into a storage closet. "Look." She pointed to a small screen mounted inside, the yacht's navigation display. Where the AIS identification system should have shown their vessel's broadcast signal, there was only one word in red: offline. "We're dark," Isabel said, her voice breaking. "No one knows we're here. No one can track us." Jimmy's chest tightened. A yacht going dark in international waters wasn't a malfunction. It was intentional. It was preparation. Isabel grabbed his wrist, her nails digging into his skin. "I heard them talking 3 days ago. Sunset tomorrow. They said, sunset tomorrow. No mistakes this time. Mr. Gates, they're going to kill you." Isabel had been invisible for 11 years. She moved through Jimmy's world like a ghost, polishing surfaces that already gleamed, preparing meals that were barely acknowledged, washing sheets that told stories she'd trained herself not to see. Invisibility was survival. Invisibility was safety.
In the world of billionaires, staff who noticed too much didn't stay employed, or worse, didn't stay alive. But 3 weeks ago, something changed. Victoria had started asking questions, personal questions. "Isabel, do you have family back home? A daughter, right? Where does she go to school?" The questions felt wrong, like someone measuring what you'd lose. Then Isabel found the first piece of evidence in the trash, a small glass vial labeled in pharmaceutical code she didn't recognize. Victoria had said it was vitamins when Isabel asked, but vitamins didn't come in vials that required gloves to handle. Isabel kept the vial. Her gut screamed warnings her mind tried to ignore. Now, in the darkness of the storage closet, Jimmy stared at her like she'd grown a second head. "Isabel, this is insane. Victoria wouldn't." "I've been documenting it," Isabel interrupted, pulling out her phone with shaking hands. "For 3 weeks I've been watching because something felt wrong." She showed him the first photo, Jimmy's life jacket in the equipment locker, the straps cleanly cut halfway through, positioned so they'd look intact but fail under pressure. Jimmy's throat tightened. He reached for the phone, zooming in. The cuts were surgical, deliberate, hidden on the interior where no casual inspection would catch him.
"When did you?" 4 days ago, Isabel whispered. "I check the safety equipment every week as part of my duties. That's when I noticed." She swiped to the next photo.
The yacht's EPIRB emergency beacon, wires deliberately disconnected, the housing carefully replaced to look functional. Then another image, a bank transfer receipt she'd found in David's cabin trash, $200,000 to someone named Nancy Pritchard, labeled discretionary services. Nancy's the first mate, Isabel said quietly. She's been with you for 5 years, loyal, until someone paid more. Jimmy felt the world tilting. Nancy. He'd trusted her with navigation, with crew management, with his life. "Show me more," he said, his voice hollow. Isabel swiped to a voice recording, her hand trembling as she pressed play. Victoria's voice filled the tiny space, casual and cold. "The insurance alone is $12 million, plus the company shares revert to community property, and nobody questions a drunk man falling overboard during a celebration." David's laugh followed, easy and familiar. "Sunsets poetic, romantic even. The golden hour makes everything look better." Jimmy stumbled backward, hitting the storage shelves. The champagne in his system turned to acid. Every dizzy spell over the last month. Every morning he'd blamed stress for the nausea. Every time Victoria had insisted he'd drink his special green smoothie for his health. He told himself it was work. He told himself it was age. His mind had refused to see the truth because seeing it would shatter everything he'd built his life around. This was betrayal blindness, his brain protecting him from a truth too devastating to accept. The room spun. Isabel caught his arm as his knees buckled. "Mr. Gates, I need you to stay quiet and stay conscious, because if they know you've seen what I've seen, they'll move the timeline up, and we're 12 hours from any coastline." She pulled him deeper into the service corridors, the narrow passages staff used to move unseen through the yacht's luxury spaces. Jimmy had owned this vessel for 3 years and never knew these passages existed. The walls were narrower here, the lighting harsh and industrial. This was the mud room, the maintenance tunnels, the unrealized regions of his own yacht. Isabel moved with the confidence of someone who'd memorized every inch of invisible territory. She stopped at a junction where pipes converged, pulled back a loose panel, and revealed a small space behind the walls. Inside sat a weathered man with gray stubble and tired eyes, monitoring a handheld radio scanner.
"This is Omar," Isabel said. "Former maritime security. He's been living in the crew quarters unofficially for 6 months." Omar looked up at Jimmy without surprise. "The ghost," he introduced himself with a bitter smile. "I saw what was coming. Tried to warn Captain Rodriguez 6 months ago about security vulnerabilities. Got let go for asking too many questions." Jimmy's mind reeled. "If you knew something was wrong—" "I had suspicions, not proof," Omar cut him off. "Strange equipment purchases that didn't make sense. Crew members suddenly nervous around me. Nancy asking questions about emergency protocols she already knew. Then there were the SPYNL cameras, panoramic infrared security that should detect everything 360 degrees around the ship. Someone had been adjusting blind spots." He gestured to his modest setup, a radio scanner, and a laptop connected to what looked like a jury-rigged antenna. "But I know these systems better than the people who fired me." Omar pulled up a screen showing multiple camera angles. "Your fiancée's people disabled the main VSAT satellite system 2 days ago, blamed it on a software update. They're using downlink jamming to create noise in the satellite frequency. But they forgot about the backup, old 4G system, invisible tech, like me." His fingers moved across the keyboard. He clicked on a video file. The timestamp read 3:17 a.m., 2 weeks ago. Victoria stood alone in the galley, wearing latex gloves, carefully measuring white powder from an unmarked bag labeled Protein Supplement, JG.
The same container Jimmy drank from every morning. She worked methodically, precisely, like someone who'd done this before. When she finished, she sealed the bag and tucked it into her robe pocket, checking the doorway before slipping out. Jimmy's hands clenched into fists, his throat closed. He'd seen the bitter residue on the rim some mornings, had told himself it was just the spinach, had chosen comfort over truth. "How long," he whispered, "how long have they been poisoning me?" Omar fast-forwarded through more footage. "Based on what Isabel and I have reviewed, at least 6 weeks, small doses, enough to make you tired, foggy, dependent on Victoria's care, not enough to kill you outright, that would raise questions. But enough to make an accident seem plausible, enough to make you weak when you need to be strong." Another video clip appeared. David in the engine room 3 nights ago, meeting with Nancy and 2 crew members Jimmy didn't recognize. David passed thick envelopes to each of them. Nancy counted her money carefully before nodding. The audio was muffled, but Isabel had enhanced it. "Sunset celebration, port side railing. He'll be drunk, disoriented from the double dose. When he goes over, the cut life jacket fails. Nancy makes sure the rescue is slow. Captain finds an empty railing and a distraught widow."
The words hit Jimmy like physical blows. Every detail planned, every contingency covered. Omar closed the video and pulled up a maritime chart instead. "We need to talk about where you are, Mr. Gates." He pointed to a spot in the middle of the Mediterranean, surrounded by nothing but blue. 500 miles from any coastline. You're in international waters, the high seas." "What does that mean?" Jimmy asked, though dread was already pooling in his stomach. "It means this yacht falls under flag state jurisdiction, Liberian law, since that's where the vessel is registered." "And Liberia?" Omar's expression was grim. "They don't have the resources or interest to investigate a billionaire's accidental death. There's no local Coast Guard to call, no nearby port authority. You're in a legal black hole where anything can happen and no one will ask questions. That's why they chose international waters for your murder." He traced a line on the map with his finger. "But if we reach here, 12 nautical miles from any coast, we enter territorial waters. That triggers a jurisdictional shift, real Coast Guard authority, real law enforcement that has to respond. Port state jurisdiction means Italian law applies once we're within that boundary."
Jimmy leaned closer, hope flickering. "How long until we reach it?" Omar checked his watch, and the pause felt endless. 18 hours at current cruising speed, but there's a problem. He pulled up the yacht's course on his screen. Nancy programmed the navigation to keep us in international waters as long as possible. "Your sunset celebration," Omar continued, "is scheduled for 17 hours from now. They're cutting it close deliberately. Final party on international waters, you go overboard, then the yacht crosses into territorial seas afterward. Clean getaway. By the time Italian authorities could respond, you already dead, and they're already docked with perfect alibis." A sound echoed through the corridor outside, footsteps on metal stairs growing closer. Isabel's head snapped toward the noise. "Someone's coming." Omar was already shutting down his screens. "Back entrance, now." He pointed to a narrow maintenance shaft, barely wide enough for a person. "Leads to the laundry room. Isabel, take him. I'll cover the equipment." Isabel grabbed Jimmy's wrist and pulled him toward the shaft. "Crawl. Fast. Don't make noise." Jimmy squeezed into the tight space, his expensive shirt catching on metal brackets.
The shaft was dark and hot, smelling of engine oil and detergent. Isabel crawled behind him, her movements practiced and silent. Behind him, voices filtered through the walls. "Someone's been in here." It was Nancy's voice, sharp with suspicion. "Fresh coffee cup, still warm." "Search the corridors," David's voice replied. "If Omar is still on this boat, I want him found." Isabel's hand pressed against Jimmy's back, urging him forward. They emerged in the laundry room, a space filled with industrial washers and the chemical smell of bleach. Isabel quickly closed the panel behind them and shoved a laundry cart in front of it. She turned to Jimmy, her eyes fierce. "You need to go back to your cabin, act normal, drink what she gives you, but only sip it. Complain about your stomach, act tired, but not suspicious." "Isabel, I can't just—" "You have to," she cut him off. "I'm invisible to them. You're the target. As long as they think you're clueless and pliable, I can keep gathering evidence." She pulled a small flash drive from her apron pocket. "This has everything Omar recorded, every video, every photo. I need to hide it somewhere they'd never think to look." Jimmy stared at this woman he'd never really seen, this woman risking everything for someone who barely knew her daughter's name. "Why?" he asked, his voice breaking. "Why are you doing this for me?" Isabel met his eyes, and for the first time in 11 years, she didn't look away. "Because my brother died 5 years ago. Someone cut corners on safety equipment to save money. The company called it bad luck. It wasn't. It was greed." Her voice hardened. "I swore I'd never look away again when I saw something wrong." She moved to the laundry room door, checking the corridor. "And because you're arrogant, Mr. Gates, you don't see people like me. You probably don't remember I have a daughter, even though I've mentioned her a dozen times."
Jimmy felt shame burn through him. "But you're not evil," Isabel continued. "You built something real with your company. You treat your employees fairly, even if you don't notice them. Victoria and David, they're something else. They're the kind of people who measure what you lose before they decide to take from you." Footsteps echoed in the corridor outside, coming closer. Isabel shoved Jimmy toward a pile of clean linens. "Hide, now!" Jimmy crouched behind the industrial dryers just as the door opened. Nancy stepped inside, her first mate uniform crisp, her expression cold and calculating. "Isabel," she said pleasantly, "working late?" Isabel didn't flinch. She continued folding towels with practiced efficiency. "Mr. Gates needed fresh linens for the morning. I'm preparing them now." Nancy walked slowly around the room, her eyes scanning every corner. She stopped at the laundry cart, the one blocking the maintenance panel. "This is in the wrong place," she said, her hand resting on the cart's handle. "I moved it to reach the upper shelves," Isabel replied, her voice steady. "I'll put it back." Nancy stared at her for a long moment. Then she smiled, and it was the coldest thing Jimmy had ever seen. "You're very thorough, Isabel, very attentive to details." She moved toward the door, then paused. "That's a good quality in staff, as long as you know which details matter and which ones to forget." The threat hung in the air, unmistakable. Nancy left, and Jimmy heard her footsteps fade down the corridor. He waited until Isabel signaled, then emerged from his hiding spot, his legs shaking. "She knows," he whispered. "She knows someone's watching." Isabel's jaw tightened. "Then we have less time than we thought." She pressed the flash drive into Jimmy's palm. "Hide this in your cabin, somewhere only you would think to look. Not a safe, they can crack those. Somewhere personal." Jimmy closed his fist around the drive, his wedding photo frame. Victoria had given it to him 6 months ago, back when he'd believed everything was real. The back panel had a hollow space he'd discovered by accident. "I know where," he said.
Isabel nodded. "Good. Now go. Walk slowly. Act like you've been drinking. If Victoria sees you, tell her you couldn't sleep and went for air." Jimmy moved toward the door, then stopped. "Isabel." She looked up. "Your daughter. What's her name?" For the first time since this nightmare began, Isabel's expression softened. "Maria," she whispered. "Her name is Maria. She's 8. She wants to be a marine biologist." Tears suddenly filled her eyes. "If something happens to me—" "Nothing will happen to you," Jimmy interrupted, and he meant it with every fiber of his being. "I promise you, we both survive this. You and Maria both get the life you deserve." He opened the door carefully, checking the corridor. Empty for now. He stepped out, forcing his shoulders to slump, his walk to weave slightly. The performance of a drunk, tired man wandering his own yacht. He made it 20 feet before Victoria appeared at the end of the corridor, wrapped in a silk robe, her hair perfect despite the late hour. "Jimmy," she called, her voice warm and concerned. "There you are. I was worried." She moved toward him with open arms, and Jimmy forced himself not to recoil. He accepted her embrace, feeling her hands on his back, wondering if she was already imagining pushing him over the railing. "I couldn't sleep," he mumbled, letting his words slur slightly. "Needed some air. Too much champagne." Victoria's fingers traced up his spine, a gesture that once meant affection, but now felt like measurement. "You work too hard, baby. Come back to bed. I made you a nightcap, your favorite, warm milk with honey." Jimmy's stomach turned, but he smiled. "You're too good to me." They walked together toward the master suite, Victoria's arm linked through his. Through a porthole, Jimmy saw the first hint of dawn breaking across the Mediterranean. The water was beautiful and infinite and utterly indifferent to human suffering. 17 hours until sunset. 17 hours until they planned to kill him. And somewhere in the service corridors of his own yacht, an invisible woman was fighting to save his life, while he pretended not to know he was walking with his murderer. What happens next? The clock is ticking. Victoria has a plan, but so does Isabel. In Part 2, the breakfast confrontation begins. The deadly trunk is opened, and Jimmy will have to make an impossible choice. Will the invisible save the blind, or will sunset come too soon?